twists for part 2 of Simplicity 9780. This is a longer video. It's not a difficult pattern, but there are just lots of parts, lots of gathering, and I put in all of the steps because this is an easy to sew or a beginner pattern. So a lot of sewists who will join us today may be one of their first projects they've made. So I wanted to leave everything in, but it will be time stamped so you can skip to the parts you want to see, skip over the stuff that you've heard 100 times, and we'll get going. So now let's head over. We're going to look at our directions, and we're going to start with that front neck yoke where the little opening is. All right, I have transferred the markings in the circles. We're on yoke front, pattern piece 1, and you can see the little circles. And I stuck a pin through, marked where the pin came through, and I marked those. Now you could do pins all along that dotted line if you want to. It's very slightly curved. I'm going to use my little ruler up here at the top of it, straight up. And I even did a little slashes to make sure I don't go too far. So I'm just going to transfer this, and then I want it to be slightly rounded, so I'm just freehanding this. But you definitely could exactly follow the, there we go. And then we're going to cut down the middle when we're done. So I'm going to go to my sewing machine. I'm going to make sure I have a fairly short stitch length. I'm going to do a 2.5. You could go as low as 2. And we're going to stitch down the sides and back up. So we've got right sides together. That's going to finish off this front opening for the neckline. So this is steps 1, 2, and 3. This is 1. I'm sinking right in that point and turning. Now it's important to have this open down here in that point. If it's not open, when you go to slash, your 2 stitching lines are going to be too close to each other. Now it's going to be really tight right in here, and this is easy for this to fray out. And I think I'm going to come back and just stitch over this one more time just in this point, just to make it really reinforced. You could always use a little tiny bit of glue. It doesn't have us doing interfacing or anything, but an interfacing would be another thing that would help reinforce that if you want to put a little patch of interfacing in that spot. Okay, I'm going to shorten my stitch length even more. I'm going to go to like 2.20, 2.25. I'm stitching right in my old stitching. I'm not back stitching or anything like that. I just really want to make sure that I don't have fraying issues, and this is how I'm going to do it. All right, now we can cut that open. It's all ready to be slashed open. So we're going to just cut straight down the middle here. Right up to the point, to but not through. And we got to get really close because it won't turn if we don't. I'm actually going to get my applique scissors, which are even pointier and sharper, so I can really get close to that point. Now, if your fabric really frays, before you sew this, put a piece of fusible interfacing in here. That's just going to stabilize this more and prevent it from pulling apart. Now that we've done that, this should flip around. And our little notch collar, that's how it looks. Now I have not pressed it, and you can see there's actually, see that one little thread's kind of keeping it from coming apart. I'm going to make sure there's not some more I need to trim. You can see the fraying already starting to happen. Sometimes I'll put a little piece of little fabric glue in there. All right, I am going to put some fabric glue on that and let it dry before I flip it around. All right, I've got fabric glue. This is like the generic of Aleene's. I don't know what happened to my Aleene's glue, but I'm taking the lid off. I'm using my finger because I want just the tiniest amount on there. I'm going to do it on both sides. Not trying to make it thick or stiff, I'm just trying to keep it from fraying. And if I have to, I can come back and reopen it if it kind of glues itself shut. All right, now that that is done, I have to let it dry. One thing you can do to help it dry is put it between your Teflon sheets at the ironing board and give it a little press. Sometimes that helps. I'm not going to do anything because I have some of the glues will discolor. For instance, Fray Check yellows, and it's not my favorite on anything, especially anything that's white like this. You will see the yellowing through it. So I'm going to just let this dry for a minute, and then we'll come back and we'll move on to step 2, which is the understitching. Besides having transferred my markings for the stitching line, I also went ahead and clipped all of my little notches. You can see my tiny little clips. You see that? I think it's the easiest thing to do to clip, and I usually clip less than 1/4 of an inch. I clip them pretty short, but it's nice and easy to find and line up. So all of those markings are done. I usually do it while cutting, so I've got all the notches already marked on everything, so as I take them apart, I don't have to worry about losing those markings. Now that my glue is dry, I am going to do the understitching. This stitching is only going to show on the facing side, so I'm actually just going to pull one of these over before I completely flip it around. You can see here's my little seam line. It ends right there. And I am going to stitch right on this side. So I'm hitting the little legs, this little bit of seam allowance, and I'm going to stitch right next to my stitching line. I'm not going to go all the way to the point because there's not enough room. There's not enough seam allowance there. If you look in here at the needle, here is my seam line. Here's the inside of my foot, and here's my needle. If I line up this seam line to this part of my foot, now this is specific to my foot. I know we are all going to have different presser feet. This is my 1/4 inch straight stitch foot that I'm using on the Bernina. If I line it up there, I am going to be stitching so close to this line, but still being over here so that it's going to not show from the outside. And what that does is it helps keep this from trying to flip around when being worn. I did lengthen my stitch back to my normal stitching length. So you can see here's the end of my stitching. I'm going to stop it about 5/8 inch in. Do just a short little, I'm going to do one more stitch, back stitch. Okay, and now that I've done that side, I'm going to give it a quick trim. I'm going to flip this back over for now. And I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Now the side that I'm stitching on is going to be considered the facing side. I did press this over at the ironing board before I started. And because of how I'm doing this, you can see everything's pushed out of the way. It opens up. Here is where the end of my little opening is. Let's look at this. So you can see how this seam allowance is now pulling this way. You can see how it's opened it up. So this is the inside before I turn it. On this side, there's stitching, and on this side, there isn't. So I'm going to go ahead and flip it around. And now it just needs a little pressing. So I'm going to give it a quick press so it looks a little tidier, and I'll show you how it looks. Okay, so this is going to be considered the right side of my front yoke, and this is the wrong side, and you can see my understitching. And to me, that is the easiest way to do this. I didn't understitch all the way down in here, you can see, and you can see there's a few little ironing puckers, but it's really pressing. It goes away. You can see it can go away. This is also the wrong side. I'm not going to worry about it. So that's done. Now they have us go ahead and kind of baste these edges before we go on to the next step. So you can do that. Otherwise, you can just put a few pins or tack it, whatever. We just don't want our little front-facing pieces to slip apart. Let's go ahead and just look at what's coming up next. Now that we have that yoke completed, they're going to have us gather on our front dress to the front yoke and the back dress to the back yoke, and then add pockets. I never do their pocket method. If you notice, they come in and clip through the seam allowance right at the pocket, and it's really hard to do any seam finish here. And there's two things I don't like about it. It does lay nicely, however, pockets take a ton of stress, especially if you actually use them and put your hands in them. And because you have clipped through right at the seam allowance, it makes a hole in no time. So we will be doing our pockets differently, giving you a heads up now. So what I'm going to do, because we have gathering on the front, the back, and the sleeve, I'm going to go ahead and do all the gathering now. I'm going to adjust my machine to a 4. And that way I'm not switching my stitch length back and forth. And I'm going to go ahead and do my double row of gathering lines. And it looks like there should be gathering lines on the bottom here too, though they don't talk about it. They show it gathered when they gather the lower edge between the dots. 10, gather the upper edge. So they just don't show doing it. 12 is gathering it. So I'm going to go ahead and do all the gathering. This is my sleeve. So on top of here, it just says gather, and you can see this little dot. So I'm assuming we're just going to go from this dot to the other dot. So it's pretty much straight across. And down here, same thing. Here's our gathering line. It leaves just a little bit from the seam allowance. So here's my 18 cutting line. Here's my 18 gathering dot line. So it is, if you think this is going to be my 5/8, it is about 1.5 inches over. So it's going to have this little tiny section at the underneath of the sleeve that doesn't have gathers, it looks like. So we're going to do all of those gathers. So for these, same thing. You can see our little, it just says gather. And I don't know if it means from the notch. It doesn't look like it. I think the notch is just for, yeah, the gather goes all the way across. You can see the gather goes all the way across. Okay, we're going to start that now. All right, for all of the gathering, I'm going to do 2 rows, 1 row at 1/4 inch and 1 row at 5/8 of an inch. So we're just gonna, and no back stitching, that's part of the gathering line. And I went ahead and put a pin. I always do this at the center front, center back, center of sleeve, wherever. You can also do a little cut like I do for my notches, if that makes it easier for you, but as long as you have a marking there, so you're going to need it when we go to put everything together. We're just gonna go from the marking to marking. There's round 1. Make sure you leave plenty of tails, and you don't want it pre-gathering while you're stitching. You want it to stay flat. It won't pull nicely for you if you let it pre-gather. All right, so there is round 1. This is the front. And you can see there's just 1 notch cut in the armhole, so that's one of the ways for me to tell this is my front. I'm going to do the same thing for the back and my sleeve top and bottom. We're still going to have to come back and do gathering again around the neckline and around the ruffle at some point, but this will get us through quite a few steps. Okay, I have got all of my gathering lines in top and bottom for both sleeves and for my front and my back. And now we're going to pin our fronts and our backs to their appropriate yoke. So here's the back yoke. It's not faced. And I've got it pinned center back on each side. And I've done the same with the front. And now we're going to start pulling our gathering lines. And because I usually do my gathering with the right side up, I know that the bobbin thread will be on the wrong side. So when I'm pulling my threads, usually it pulls better if you pull the bobbin thread. It's just the way the stitches are made. Now it depends on the machine, but as a rule, I have found that it pulls better. You want to pull them at the same time. You can see how nicely that is coming in. So we're just going to pull our gathering lines, and so we've taken it up. So that's the fullness taken up. Now I need to move those gathers around. It's not super heavily gathered. We're going to move them around and make them nice and even. If it's easier for you, go ahead before you gather to quarter or whatever, and you'll see that there's a little notch there. There's also a notch somewhere along here. So I can line them up, and that will actually help me keep everything nice and even too. So match up those notches. So we're going to do that for both pieces. Once that's done, we'll come and stitch them. Okay, I want to just say quickly in here, this is actually a pretty easy dress pattern overall. The thing that makes it maybe more tedious is the amount of gathering, but the stitching, the sewing overall, this is not that complicated, and I would probably put this in the easy category. It's listed on the pattern as easy to sew. However, be prepared to give yourself lots of extra time for the amount of gathering that is involved in this. It just always takes more time when you have to run all those gathering lines, then do the gathering, then stitch it again to put the gathering lines in. Then we have to go back and do seam finishes. So just be prepared on the front end. Give yourself extra time. This is a one-day sew for me. From if I just spent the whole day sewing, from cutting out to the end of the day. It takes a little longer when I'm filming for you. It actually takes quite a bit longer, but I usually can get it done in a day. However, today I'm not going to try and push it. I have other things going on. So I'm going to probably do a 2-day sew on this just for my own comfort and ease, and instead of trying to really push it out. So we'll see how far I get today. But give yourself plenty of time when you're sewing this, even though it's easy. I have my front and my back gathered, and the gather's nice and even. You can see, here's my front. You can see it's got the facing, and here are the nice even gather. So now I'm ready to just come and stitch on that 5/8 inch line. And then I'm going to go ahead and serge that edge. There's lots of ways you could do it. This could even be self-enclosed on this front one because it has this yoke piece. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the back. The back does not have a facing, so we're just going to sew on that 5/8 inch line. I probably will sew with the gathers up and the facing on the bottom. That way I can keep an eye on my gathers and make sure they don't get moved or pleated over as I'm sewing. Don't forget now to turn your machine back to your regular stitch length, because we're going to do a regular stitch. Before you start stitching, we have pinned this right sides together. Make sure that you have it pinned so that the side of the facing or the neckline that has your understitching is on the correct side, that you don't have, it won't be showing when you open this up. So the way I have it, here's my piece with understitching right here, and when this opens up you can see there was no understitching, and this is the right side of the garment. So just double check that before you start stitching. You'll notice I'm sort of stitching right on this gathering line, and that gathering line is my 5/8 inch line, so it makes it easy for me to make sure that I've my pleats are good. All right, let's give it a look. So here's the facing side, and then when I flip it up, this is before pressing, but there you can see the cute little gathers. Very cute. And now this is ready to be serged. Now that we have our fronts and our backs gathered onto their yokes, I'm going to turn to my pocket pieces, and I'm going to serge around the curvy part of the pocket, not the straight part. I'll get that when we do our side seams. So I'm going to just go around all 4 pieces, just like this at the serger, so that they're seam finished. Remember, I am deviating from their pocket instructions. Okay, so we're going to do that 4 times, and then we're going to come over and attach it to our side seams. Okay, using the notches and the circle markings, we're going to match up our pockets on the side seams, and this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to stitch the pocket down at 1/2 inch. There's a reason for that, and I'll tell you when we come back to finish this, but we're going to stitch it, just stitch down the pocket at 1/2 inch, and I'm going to serge my side seams. So I'm going to do that for all 4 side seams before they're put together. So all 4 sides. I'm going to straight stitch 1/2 inch, serge the whole thing on the edge. I did lay to each other to make sure they're lined up properly, and then I laid front to back to make sure everything was lined up, because we don't want our pockets to be off. Here's my 5/8. Got it on the 1/2 inch. it looks like that. I'm going to do that 4 times, and then we'll come back and serge it. Okay, we have all of our side seams serged. Now there's lots of ways you can put this together. This is just my preference. I gave both yokes a quick press just along that seam so everything lays nice. And now we're going to just lay our front and our back along that side seam and start pinning them together. Make sure you pull your pockets out. We're going to pull the pockets out like this. We're laying them on top of each other, right sides together. And we're going to actually sew the pocket before we do the side seam. Remember, we did 1/2 inch here where we attach the pocket, and that will make good sense when we come back to do our seam allowance in a minute on the side seam. But we're just going to match our pockets up really carefully. We're going to stitch around them. And this here does not matter as much. You can do 5/8, you can do 1/2, as long as they're sturdy. Push your little seam allowances back out of the way because we're just going to stitch right up to our stitching line here. So I'm pushing the garment out of the way. You can see this is my seam where it's attached, and I'm just going to stitch around like 1/2 inch. If you go a little smaller with seam allowance, you have a little more room in your pocket, but it doesn't really matter. Okay, the main thing is you don't want to cause a pleat right there, so I'm just being careful that I don't get the actual garment back here. I'm only getting pocket. Make sure my seam allowances are out of the way. All right, so there's one pocket, and now we're going to do the other one, and then I'll show you how we're going to handle the side seams. Okay, we're ready for side seam. You can see I still have my pocket pulled out. Just as a reminder, we stitched the pocket on at 1/2 inch. We're now going to go to 5/8, and this is why. This keeps our pocket from poking through at the side seam, so I'm going to start up here at the 5/8, and we're going to stitch till we reach our first marking. We're going to back stitch, then we're going to pick it up, come down to the next marking, start there, and stitch to the bottom, and that leaves our opening for our pocket. It gives us a little extra room so we don't have the pockets pulling through to the outside because we did the little 1/2 inch trick. Now you can adjust where you start and stop on your pocket if you need more or less room, or if you want to adjust it, you certainly can. You can also just move the pocket up if it's too low for you, for instance, but you can't go much lower because you will run out of sides. Okay, so here's my original stitching. I'm going to be stitching next to it now. There you can see it. There's my marking. Okay, and now we're going to come down to the marking down here. So I'm going to lift my foot up and come to the marking. Where did I just say I was? Oh, it's at the pin. So I'm right next to my stitching line, 5/8 of an inch. And you could do, I'm just doing 2 back stitches. You could do more. The bottoms of the pockets are where they especially get a lot of pull. If you actually use your pockets, and you can see I am lined up perfectly with my 5/8. Okay, we're going to do that for both sides. Now, this is before pressing. So here's our side seam, and here's our pocket. And because we did the little just off by 5/8 of an inch, the pocket completely disappears. It's also, the pocket can fold to either side. So this pocket is going to fold this way. And this is before pressing, so once I press it, it will completely disappear. And there's our side seam. Okay, I'm going to do the other side, and I'll meet you back here for sleeves. All right, I am ready to press my side seams, and I want to show you why I do it this way. The pocket will flip either way easily. We don't have any issues with it pulling, and I can still have a pressed open seam if I want to, which I do. So I'm pressing my seam open. This is the front of my garment, and so you can see the pocket easily lays to the front. It could lay the other way, but because of how we've done it, we don't have any weak spots in our pocket. And on this side, look at how pretty it looks. Perfect. So after I press the other side, I'm going to go back to my overlock and I'm going to serge around the hemline of this. Because this has an applied hem or an applied ruffle that actually sticks up, it's just top stitched on. We need to hem this, just have this seam finished in some way, so I'm just going to serge around it. If you don't have a serger, you could bias bind this. You could fold it twice like this and stitch it. You just need some way to have this edge finished off. All right, so here is our side seam and our edge finish, so you can see the pocket. I did not understitch, but you can. To understitch, you would lift up and you will stitch the pocket to the seam allowance so that it always pulls to the front. I have not done that, and it's something I could add at any time, so I may come back and do some understitching under there to make the pocket always lay the right direction so I don't have to fish for my pockets if they flip to the back. But that's ready to go. We're going to move on to sleeve. Okay, I have already gathered the top and the bottom of my sleeve, which is not shown here. It says gather the upper edge, and then they have you stitch the underarm, and then they have you gather the bottom. I don't know why they do it in that order, but it's much easier to just gather them beforehand. Since they're both gathered, and I've pressed my little cuffs or our bands, we're going to go ahead and just sew our bands together like this. And then we need to do an underarm seam, or this seam right here on the sleeve. And this sleeve needs seam finished. Now we can serge it. We can do a French seam or a mock French seam. You could bias bind it depending on the fabric you're using. I'm going to go ahead and serge it flat. It's already gathered, you can see, but I'm going to go ahead and just serge down the seam here of my sleeve on each side so that I can just press my sleeve open like it's pictured here. I could also straight stitch it together and then serge them together. That would be an option, or I could just go to the serger and serge off some of the seam allowance and serge it together that way. I like to have extra seam allowance in there. I like to be able to press my seam open, so I'm going to go ahead and serge them flat. The only thing you need to watch out for is that you don't accidentally get these gathering lines caught while you're serging. So you just want to make sure you either pin them or hold them out of the way while you're here doing your seam finish. All right, we're going to do that all the way around. We don't have to worry about the top or the bottom because the bottom will get caught in the cuff and the top will get sewn to the upper sleeve and we'll serge it then. Okay, so I'm going back over my directions. I have made my little cuffs. I have got my gathering in. I've got the seam finish on here. And they have us do the cuff. They have us do the underarm seam and the cuff next. And then they have us add our upper sleeve to it. But I'm just going to tell you, it's a lot easier to add that upper sleeve now while it's flat than to do it when it becomes a circle when we do the underarm seam. And it doesn't make it any harder to put the cuff on to have the upper sleeve added. So I'm going to go ahead and skip all the way up to 14, and I'm going to add the upper sleeve to the lower sleeve and get that on first. It makes so much more sense to me than the way that they have you do it. So we're going to do that. There is a notch to help us line it up, and there's also a front and a back to this. If you look, I don't know if you can see, but this side is narrower and it gets wider as it goes. This is the back. The wide part is the back. So we want to make sure we get it on our sleeve correctly. And our sleeve actually has notches. This is the front. So when I go to put it on, it's going to go this way. Narrow side to wide side, right sides together. So I'm skipping to step 14. All right, so I have taken my upper sleeve and made sure I had it on the correct way so that I have the back part of it to the back. So there you can see my two notches and the wider part of it. So it's pinned on. I've matched my notch to notch here, and now I'm ready to just start pulling in my gathering lines just like we did before. So I always set up both sleeves and then I can sew them at the same time. So I will pin them both. Got the other one here. Then gather both, then sew both. Once this is sewn at the sewing machine on the 5/8 inch, I will go back and serge this line just like I did the yoke to the dress part. Once I get it all gathered, I'll come back for sewing.
swamp. Instead, too bad about the parade.
So here is how the sleeve pieces look. You can now see my companion fabric. This is how this, I'm actually really pleased that I chose to do the sleeve this way. I think it's going to be really cute, and I'm going to have this same trim up here at the neck, and then I'll also make a little belt out of it. These are my cuffs. I've already sewn the 5/8. The next thing we're going to do on the cuff is we're going to fold down 5/8 and press it on one end. This is what's going to get folded up like this later, so we're going to do that. And we're going to go ahead and do our underarm seam. That's what I'm going to do next. We have right sides together. This is our underarm seam, 5/8 of an inch. The only thing we have to worry about is when we get down here that we have all of our little basting threads out of the way when we do our stitching. Don't forget to backstitch top and bottom. Here is how the cuff looks. I've got my 5/8 turned up, everything's pressed. I also pressed open that underarm seam. Now we're going to take the cuff, the side that isn't folded up. Let me open that, there we go, so you can see. I've got my folded up edge here. The side that isn't folded up is what we're going to match up. Underarm seam to cuff seam, like this. And then we're going to come across and half it and pin that. We're quartering our sleeve so that when we get ready to do gathers, our gathers will be nice and even around. Now I'm ready to pull my gathering lines, and we'll stitch the cuff, part one of the cuff on. So I'm going to get both cuffs pinned and gathered, and I'll be back to sew it together with you. We're ready for putting our cuff on our sleeve. So you can see up here is the upper sleeve, which to me is sort of like the yoke. So we have the upper sleeve, our lower sleeve, everything's gathered on. This is already serged. Now I have gathered the cuff, or gathered the sleeve onto the cuff, and it is ready to be sewn. I have both of them ready. So now we're going to just stitch it up. Now you can use your free arm if you want to, or you can sew it like this in a circle. So if you have a flatbed machine, this is the way to sew it. I'm also going to start this underarm seam. Make sure that my seam is open. Now I'm sewing a circle, so if you don't backstitch, just make sure you come around and hit your old stitches. All right, let's pull out the pins and look at it. I never trim any of my basting stitches until I have checked it to make sure I don't have to rebaste or move any of those if I get a fold over or something like that. All right, let's open this up. This is how it looks from the inside. Now you could serge this off a little bit if you want less bulk inside your little cuff here. Look at how cute that looks with the fabric combinations. So that's how our gathers look. We want all of the seam allowance pushed down because this cuff, I'm going to come back here to where my seam is. This cuff is going to fold over like this. Now we can top stitch it down, we can hand baste it, there's lots of ways to do it. If you're going to top stitch it, instead of folding just to your stitching line, you want to fold just beyond it. So you want to cross that stitching line a tiny bit so that when you top stitch, it does not, you don't miss it, because it's pretty easy for that to slide on you when you're top stitching. So I'm going to put a pin or two in it and make sure that I have it lined up properly. And we're just coming straight across. Again, I'm making sure I'm going just beyond my other stitching line because I think I'm going to top stitch this. Psst. I pinned it so well I completely missed the cuff. Now when I top stitch this, I'm going to stitch from the right side, so I want to make sure I pin this correctly. so that is how the cuff is going to look once we get it totally pinned on. So I'm going to pin both cuffs, and we'll come back and we'll stitch on. Okay, we're going to now top stitch in the little arm band. I've got them both pinned and ready to go. I want to stitch on the outside, the right side of my garment, and I'm doing the thing I did earlier where I'm using the inside part of my foot for the folded edge here where it's stitched on, and so I'm just going to be stitching really close to that edge. It's like 1/8 of an inch. I'm starting at the underarm, so here's my seam right here. That's where I'm starting. I just poked myself with the pin, and we're going to just go all the way around carefully. And remember, when you pin this, you want to pin this so that's up above your stitching line a little bit so it catches it. We don't end up with any holes. Again, use your free arm if you want to. The main thing, you just don't want it to get caught from underneath. So we're just being careful. All right, let's look at it. So there's the band, and there you can see my top stitching along it. It just needs a haircut on the inside. Here you can see this is how I pulled it up just a little bit so that it caught everywhere. I don't have any places with holes. I'm going to go ahead and sew the other one, and then we'll be ready to sew the sleeve in. Give this a little bit of a haircut. Sometimes if you leave your threads to the end, they'll get caught. It's easy for them to go down in the throat plate of your machine. So if everything's good and you're happy, trim off all of those excess threads. So I have got my front dress and my sleeve, front of my sleeve, and I'm going to start pinning them in. I've got them pinned at the top. I've matched up the yoke to the upper sleeve. That seam, there's a little notch right there. Then they are going to match up at the underarm. Put a pin in that. Or two, I don't want my seam allowances folding over, so I often will pin both sides of the seam allowance so they stay in place when I'm sewing. And now we'll come around and pin this side of the back of the yoke to the back of the sleeve. And here's my notches that line back up. And we'll be ready to just sew all the way around the sleeve. Once I stitch it at 5/8, I'm going to go over the sewing machine and I'm going to serge it at 3/8. So I'm taking off a little bit. I always do with sleeves because you don't want, as a rule, all 5/8 of that seam allowance sticking up in your underarm. Okay, so now I have, I'm just going to show you from the side, pinned in, dress, and sleeve. I love the accent. We're just going to sew around at 5/8. Want to make sure these seam allowance don't fold down. I have them pushed up into the yoke or the upper sleeve. Now, before I serge it, I want to make sure that the yokes line up nice and neat. So here is my front yoke into my sleeve, and you can see the seam lines up perfectly. And I'm going to go from sleeve to back yoke. Yes, very happy. So I'm just going to go all the way around, make sure nothing's slipped on either one. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and put in the other one, and then I'll meet you over at the serger. Now that both sleeves are in, I'm going to serge inside that arm hole and serging off some of the seam allowance. You can see here I'm lining up my cut edge with this. My machine has different markings that let me know exactly where it's going to be cutting, and I also know that these are my needles right here. See these markings? These are the different positions that needles can be placed depending on what you're doing. So I know exactly how much I'm cutting off. I don't want to cut off too much. there you can see that's how it looks. So I'm going to do both sleeves real quick, and then I'll show you. And we're going to do, I think, one more thing, and then I'm going to stop for the day. Come back tomorrow and do the ruffle. We're going to go ahead and do the neckline, though. Okay, so now you can see that's how. All right, we are now to working on our neckline. I'm just going to hold this up so you can see. Look at how cute that's going to be. I did go look in the mirror, and it is the perfect length if you cut to the shorter length for a top. If you want to make this as a cute top, so cute. And I think I do. I think I want to make a top out of the same pattern. Because after you do this neckline and you hem it, you're done. You don't have to add that big ruffle at the bottom for doing a top. So look at my cute sleeve. Okay, we are going to gather our neckline now. There is a 1/2 inch seam allowance on the neckline. So when you do your gathering lines, you're going to do 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch instead of 1/4 inch and 5/8. So I'm going to do that. It says from big dot to big dot, and I put my pattern piece away, but when I look at their directions, it looks like it's just from the very front all the way around. And then we're also going to prep our, yeah, they literally, it's just from the very front. So we're also going to prep our piece of bias that we made, our 2 pieces. So let me show you. So here's our 2 pieces of bias. I have sewn them together at the back. We have 1/2 inch seam allowances on the bias piece. There are markings that we want to transfer to just one side, and that's the side that's going to get stitched on. So I have lots of little, can you see my little tiny pencil marks? This one is the notch. So I marked those on one side of the bias. The other side of the bias, we are going to fold under 1/2 inch and press all the way around. So I'm going to go ahead and flip this over. I have trimmed out a little bit of my seam because I wanted it to be not too bulky because it's bias. And then I'm just going to fold back a 1/2 inch and press it all the way around. This side will get sewn a 1/2 inch, and then they'll get folded towards each other and top stitched like we did our cuff or our sleeve band. So let's go ahead and press over a 1/2 inch all the way around our long piece of 2 pieces of bias sewn together. And we're also going to do our gathering stitches. I'll meet you back here after I get both of those things done. All right, so I have got my bias with the folded edge pressed, and I had all my little markings on there. You pin this on right side bias to wrong side of the neckline. So I found my center back of my neckline, and I have the center back of my bias, and I have them pinned together there. And then there's circles for each seam line. So there's a circle for this side and a circle for this side, and there's a little notch, and then there's a marking for the center front opening. So I've got all of those matched up. So this is how the neckline looks before gathering. So now you can see here's the bias. So now I'm going to start pulling my gathering lines and getting it evened out so that I can stitch on this side. I'm going to make sure and put my stitch back to a regular stitch length since I just basted. So I'm going to do that. And then we'll come back and finish off that little bias trim. It has this fold all the way down, but they also have this, I don't know, I probably would not have done that if I had paid attention and read ahead, because we're actually going to open this up and do seam allowance, but it won't hurt that it's there. We can actually use that press line for stitching, because we're going to, once this is sewn on, we're going to actually sew this shut, or sew our tubes and then turn them out right here at this part. It'll make sense. I'll show you in a minute. Let's get this gathered on and then we'll look at that. All right, friends, we are ready to stitch on our bias to our neckline. You can see my gathers here all the way around. Everything's pinned on. And when I did my sleeve, I sewed it with on the cuff or the little band, I sewed it with the band on top, which is easy to sew, but you can't see your pleats and it's easy to accidentally get a fold over, so I'm not going to do that for the neckline. I'm going to make sure and have the band on the bottom or the bias on the bottom, and I'm going to have my gathers on top. Make sure you've set your stitch length back to a regular stitch length. We were just gathering, and we're sewing this at 1/2 inch. all the way around. Also, your seam allowances in the sleeve are pressed towards the sleeve. So the one in the front is pressed to the sleeve and the one in the back is pressed into the sleeve. Okay, I'll meet you back here when I've gone all the way around, and we'll move on to the ties, and then we'll finish it, and then I'm done for the day. We'll be back tomorrow to finish the ruffle. I'm pooped. I have the bias sewn on, and I have my folded edge. We're going to trim this down in a minute because this is going to fold over and cover it, and it's currently too bulky. But before we do that, we're going to go ahead and finish off our tie ends. So we're just going to fold our ties right sides together, kind of push the little shirt out of the way a little bit. You can see I've got it all pinned up, and we're going to just sew 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around. I'll probably go a little shorter here at the end, and then we can pull it through. We're going to do that for both ends. So it's going to look like this. Garment where it's sewn together at the neckline. We don't want to get any of this shirt here. We want to make sure it's out of the way. Just get as close as we can. If you don't get right up next to it, it is all right because we can come back when we're top stitching and handle it then. Okay. All right. On our, whoops, I'm not quite on my 1/2 inch mark. There we go. On the 1/2 inch mark, try not to stretch this. This is bias and it will stretch. We're going to do the other side, and then we're going to trim out in here because we want this nice and tidy. So we're going to take our scissors. We're going to trim out this corner so we get a nice sharp corner. And we can also trim down some of this so it's not too thick inside our little tie when we turn it. Now I'm only going to trim this part of the ties. We're going to leave the seam allowance around the neckline, but we're going to trim out the seam allowance on the bias, but we're going to trim out the actual neckline of the dress right here a little bit so it's not too bulky. All right, when I get up here close to the garment, I'm just going to veer off and leave it long there. As you can see, this is what I trimmed off. I'll trim off a little bit here at the end. We're going to pull that inside out. I have to do the other side, and then here on the neckline, we're going to come in and trim out a little bit here too, because we don't trim until you've looked over your stitching. So make sure you don't have any foldovers or any puckers or any mistakes. We don't want to trim first. We want to make sure it's all good. And once you've made sure it's okay, straight up, it's getting black out. Okay, once we know it's straight, we're going to tuck away the bias so that we have only seam allowance of the neckline of the shirt, and we're going to trim down a little bit of that. I'm going to flip my scissor over so that the duck bell is working with me, like this. And we're going to trim out the whole neckline. And what that's going to do, once we've turned our tie inside out and this comes around where we have it folded, it's going to flip around to the front like this. And then when we stitch it down, it'll look nice and tidy and it won't be too thick in there. Won't that be pretty? Okay, let's turn this inside out and let's do the other one. And then I'll show you how to stitch that down. Well, I'm still just working on my neckline. I'm getting ready to turn, but I am going to stop now and unplug my machines. Just got an alert for baseball-size hail and severe thunderstorm with lightning, and so I don't sew during those times because I have machines with computers in them. And if there's a lightning, we've had lightning strike close enough that it's blown out a board. So everything's getting unplugged, and I will see you in the morning. I'll look different, but we'll just pick up right here. It won't be that different for you, but that's why you're going to have a quick change in the video. See you in the morning. Good morning. We're ready to start again. It's bright and early this Saturday morning that I'm sewing. I'm going to put a few pictures in, or a few little clips of the storm that rolled in last night, just because we haven't had a weather report from Oklahoma this week yet. It was wild. We had quite a bit of hail. They were saying up to baseball size. Fortunately, we personally did not get that. We did get a lot of hail. We've got more patch than roof at this point. We've lost so many shingles in these crazy storms. That's part of Oklahoma. And we're going to get back to working. Okay, I am turning out my little ties. In the directions, it says to trim out this side of the bias, and that's really the only place, but I'm telling you, the bias is not the issue. It's really this neckline. This is where the trimming needs to be. All that said, these are a little pain to trim. I didn't think to sew a string in one end, which makes it much easier to pull through. I wish I'd done it. So instead, I've tried all of my tools. In the end, I am picking it out with a pin. And you have to be careful if you do it this way because you can snag your fabric. But I'm going inside the little hole, going down an inch or so, hooking it and pulling it up. So another little part, it's not hard, it's not a complicated sewing thing, it's not anything confusing, it's just slow. It's one of those tedious fiddly bits, so giving you a heads up. If you don't want to sew it this way, you could easily fold in, because what we're doing next is this. We are folding in our bias is folding from the back to the right side to the front. We're going to pin it and we're going to stitch right along the edge, kind of like we did our cuff. And if you wanted to, you could do that. Instead of sewing these ends, you could fold this over all the way down and just top stitch all the way down. And instead of making little tubes, I almost did that. That was my original inclination. And I think if you find this tedious, that might be the way to go. And you want to make sure when you fold over your bias that you come past where you stitched it on. So we don't want any of that to show. And then that's where we're going to stitch it. And again, you could hand stitch this if you don't want top stitching. I'm going to do the teeny tiny top stitch, little teeny tiny edge stitch. And then we'll have our little ties out here. My tie still has, it's pulled up about, yeah, it starts right here. So I still have this much to pull out and this whole one to do. So once I get that done, we'll be back. We'll edge stitch this and we'll be ready to move on to our ruffle. I finally got these ties pulled through. Now you could top stitch starting at one end of the tie and going all the way around, or I'm not going to. I'm going to leave my ties not top stitched as far as I know. I may change my mind later, but I'm only going to top stitch just the bias on the neckline for now. And I have done the thing where I have lined up my folded edge here of my bias on the inside of my toe of my foot, or the inside notch of my foot. So it's right here. This is going to give me like 1/8 inch from the edge of that bias. So if you wanted to top stitch the tie, you could just keep on going right along that edge all the way down. I don't think I'm going to because I think it makes it a little stiffer, but it does also keep it from twisting, so there's positives to doing it. is the bias. And this side's already stitched, so we don't have to worry about it being perfect on the inside, but it's pretty stinking good. And here it is on this side, and you can just see how close to the edge it is. Front of our shirt with the tie hanging off. I'm gonna go try on this as a shirt. I'm excited to see how it looks and what I think about it. Then we'll come back and we're gonna work on the ruffle and turn it into a dress. Here is the dress before it's a dress. If you cut it at the shortest cutting line, which I think is for view B, for both dresses that have the ruffle, there is a cutting line. One dress has a shorter ruffle, one has a longer ruffle. I'm doing the longer ruffle. And this is the length and how it looks if you make it as a shirt, which is not one of the things they show, but when I was working with it, I thought this would make a really cute shirt. So here's where we are so far. All that's left now is to add the ruffle and turn it into a dress. But anyway, here's how it looks as a shirt, not pressed, but it is cute. Look at how cute it is. I'm really loving the accent on the sleeve and on the little tie. All right, let's go over and make the ruffle and make this thing into a dress. Okay, we are down to our final pattern piece, which is 12 ruffle for view B. And we have 3 of these cut on the fold. And I'm going to come back to it because we're going to need to know these measurements at the top. One is for where we're gathering, one is where we are folding. But before we do any of that, we need to put it together. Serged each of the pattern pieces before I sewed them together on the short ends. Sewed them together at 5/8 so that I have a big circle of those 3 panels. Then I went to the ironing board and I pressed up my hem at the bottom. This is 5/8 hem, and at the top it's 1 3/4 inches. This is going to make the top of the ruffle, which is this in the picture. So I am going to stitch both of these down, or I'm going to stitch the bottom hem in right now. This one, I don't have to stitch down. I could just do my basting line on it and then you top stitch it down, and that would prevent from having too many rows of stitching. So I haven't decided on it, but I'm going to go ahead and put the hem in now. So here we are ready to do the hem. It's turned up 5/8, so I am sewing on the half. I'm starting at a seam line, and this seam line will end up becoming the back, the center back of the dress, this particular seam line. Because of the way it's set up, there's 3 panels, so the front won't have a seam in the center front. It'll be the center of a panel. The back will have the seam. All right, I'm just going to hem for a bit. Because this is such a long piece, if you have a walking foot or an even feet foot, do engage it. There's going to be a little bit of movement by the time you get to the other side. There's such a long, this is such a long strip to sew. All right, completely hemmed all the way around. I have set my machine back to a stitch length of 4, and we're going to start doing the gathering lines. I'm not going to do anything else. Just hold down my little folded over hem, and we're going to do 3 sets. So between each of the seam lines, as soon as I can find it, here we go. So here's a seam line, and between each seam line, these need to be 1 inch down, it appears. Oh, I'm sorry, it's 3/4 of an inch down. Let me go back, so right there. So I'm going to just miss my seam right here, and I'm just going to do a straight gathering stitch. This only has us do 1 line, and we're going to stitch right on top of it to get when we attach it to the skirt. So we're going to go all the way around at 3/4 of an inch. No back stitching. Each panel is going to get its own basting stitch. It's much easier to work with. And then we'll take it over to the dress and start quartering it and pinning it on. At every seam is where I have started and stopped my gathering lines. This is my center back seam. Here's where my hem is, where I overlap my hem, and I'm going to match that up to the center back of the dress, And this is going to get top stitched on, so we're going to apply them. It just says to match it up to the lower edge of the dress. So really, if you need to adjust height on this, you could move this up and down a little bit. You just want to make sure you give yourself enough room that you don't sew off the edge. So I'm kind of matching my serging lines, which is about 1/2 inch. So here's my center back. Okay, now I'm going to find my center front, so we're quartering this. Center front will be the middle of the front panel. So here's my front panel, middle. I'm going to put a pin in it. And then we'll match that pin to my center front, and we'll do the same. We'll find the side seams. The side seams, we'll just have to measure it out because it's going to fall kind of like 2/3 into a panel, I have a feeling. So here's my center front. And the center front of my ruffle. Lay our pins on top of each other. Once I get the ruffle quartered, we'll start pulling our gathering lines and pinning to get it all evened out. So now that I have the front and the back pinned, the side seam is the quarter for the dress. I now need to find the quarter for the ruffle. So I've matched up my 2 pins. This is it. Put a pin in it. And I'm going to put this over my side seam. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And then we'll start pulling our gathering lines. Okay, so here is a quarter of the dress, and here's the quarter of the ruffle. So you can see how much with gathering we're going to have to pull in, and it's not going to line perfectly up with each pin. So I'm going to just start pulling to get it even between my pins, and I'm pinning it up. So I'll show you the picture of that, but I just want you to see how much fullness we have between them, and make sure we're not doing right sides together. We're doing wrong side of ruffle to right side of dress, because this is a top stitched on ruffle. It's going to have a little flare at the top. So here is the ruffle pinned on. Got lots of little pins holding it. I will tell you, wherever there is a seam, it doesn't really like to gather. It's kind of flat, so I'm going to have to come in and do a little pinching and stuff so we don't have a flat space for every single seam. And it's just, there's 4 layers of fabric right there for gathering. It doesn't gather that great. This is my center back. This is where I'm going to start sewing. Make sure, since we just gathered, to put your stitch length back to a regular stitch length from basting. We're going to just stitch right on top of our basting line all the way around. This is how it looks underneath. We're ready to go. And once this is on, the garment is done. All right, so here's my center back. I'm going to actually pinch and fold a little bit. I don't want really to have foldovers, but I also don't want an area with no gathers, which is what will happen if I don't get a grip on this area right here. Make sure it's flat and make sure I'm sewing through a layer I don't need to. I'm all the way around. It is on, it is hemmed. It just needs a haircut and a press. This is how it looks on the inside. So you can kind of see it's about 3/4 of an inch is what the overlap is. It's not perfectly even. There's a couple places where I think it dips almost to 5/8, but it's pretty close. I don't think it's going to show. So I'm going to give it a trim and a press, and I'll meet you over the other side and show you what it looks like on. I decided not to cut the sash, the waist sash at all. I cut out 2 strips that are 3.5 by like 30 something. I'll have to go back and measure. I'm going to make an elasticated belt out of those instead. While my glue is drying, I've gone ahead and sewn my 2 pieces for my belt together and made a center back seam. And now I'm going to just sew the long strip down at 1/4 inch so that I'll have a long tube to turn that I can thread my elastic, and so I can backstitch beyond that selvage because I haven't cut it off yet. because this is so long, it's over 60 inches long, I put some pins in it so I don't have movement, and I also have my even feed foot engaged. Okay, I'm all the way through. I'm going to come and trim off my selvages real quick. See my back stitching there, so we're good. Now I can turn it inside out. So now I'm ready to turn it around. All right, so here is my belt casing. I cut 2 panels. They're sewn together right here. I've stitched them on each side pretty narrowly, about 1/8 of an inch or so, just to give a channel for my elastic to go through. So I'm going to fish my elastic through next. My casing is about double the length of my elastic. All right, I'm still fishing my elastic through, but as soon as I got the elastic even with one end, I went ahead and stitched it good and sturdy so this elastic won't pull through, because I'm going to come back and serge these ends. So I have the elastic about halfway through, a little more than halfway through, and I'm going to go ahead and fish it the rest of the way now. And then I will do the same thing at the other end. Okay, so here you can see how it's looking, and now I've serged and I've sealed those edges, and I'm just going to wrap this around and stitch it down like that on each side, and my belt will be done. When you're measuring for your belt, you want to go a couple inches smaller than your waist. You're going to have some fold over, so you're going to lose it a little bit there, but you also need to take into account the depth of the buckle that you're using, because it's easy to accidentally make your belt too big. You want it to be stretchy for the waist, and you want it to be small enough that it includes the dimension of this also. Very excited to show you this finished. It is an easy dress. It did take time. There's tedious things, not difficult things. Making your own bias and doing the bias thing, all the gathers take time. They just do. And turning these little things the way they did it takes time. I think I would almost recommend doing the fold over and top stitching the whole thing. It would have saved me about 40 minutes of turning time. It was so slow. I'm going to show you the dress without the belt first, and then I'm going to put the belt that I made on. Okay, so here's the dress. No belt. So there it is with the little belt. I think I might change the buckle out at some point. There's nothing wrong with this one, it's fine. But I think I would rather have probably a plain white something instead of a silver heart. But it's what I had that looked the best, I thought, with this. So, okay. Well, this is super cute. I'm definitely going to be wearing this a lot. I want to make this as a shirt. The fabric that I chose, that I was thinking about making the shirt for, is stiffer than this one, and you can see how full it looks with this. This is a softer. This is just a poly cotton plain weave, just a poly cotton broadcloth. I like that it has a pocket included. I will remind you of the size. Now, according to the measurements, I'm always about an 18 up here in the neckline, and I'm a little fuller in the bust and even fuller in the hip. But because I measured for the wearing ease, this is a solid 18 all the way down. I just cut an 18. Normally I size up, but I didn't need to with this, and I'm glad. I think this works great. I don't think I need to change anything. And the hemline hangs. Sometimes I have issues with my hemline being straight, but this hemline is nice and straight. That's a posture thing, not a sewing thing. I just have issues because I have bad back, but looks great. I'm very pleased. Okay, have you made this dress? Have you made this pattern before? What do you think about making it as just a top? I'm pretty excited, though. I'm considering the fabric I chose might be too stiff. I might need to go to a softer fabric if I make it into a top. I'm really pleased with the companion fabrics on this. I just think it just adds a little something, makes it sort of special. Thanks for sewing with me. I'll see you next week for another fun video.